Welcome back to Atlantic Fellows Conversations from the Climate Action Convening in Bogotá, Colombia. I'm Fanula Sweeney. Today we join Atlantic Fellows on the second day of the convening. Over to Halil Goga, Associate Executive Director for Community Engagement, Programming and Impact at the Atlantic Institute, who will brief us on the program for the day.
We're now going into day 2, where we are going to try to focus on finding common ground. We'll start off with a welcome ceremony, a traditional Colombian welcome ceremony, an indigenous pagamento to Mother Earth. Then we'll spend much of the morning trying to build connection between people. What we're trying to look at are 3 questions. How do we want to be together with this group? What are we trying to do? And what do we need to do to get there? So there's really big goals, such as having an impact at the next COP or the COP after that in Belém in Brazil. Smaller goals, what can we do at a local level? And more broadly, what are some of the things that we want to learn and do with each other? All of this starts at a foundation of trust, and that's what we're going to try and do this morning. In the afternoon, we are looking at things like context and jargon, understanding positionality and power. We all come from vastly different contexts. What's important to someone in the United States may not be important to someone in South Africa or in Australia or in Brazil. Are we using the same words? What do things like a just transition or planetary health mean? What does it mean when we use terms like global south or global north for disenfranchised or poor people in the global north or wealthy people in the global south? And how do we locate ourselves? Who has the levels of power? What does that look like? What is our agency? Where can we draw on our strengths? Following that, we will try to understand context and tools. We are going to work with our fellows so they can outline how they approach change. So different fellows will be presenting on how do I do my work? What are some of the barriers to do my work? What are some of the points where I'm able to have high impact? That's what today is going to look like.
Buenos días a todas y todos. Bienvenidos al segundo día de nuestro encuentro. My name is Sergio Chaparro. I am an Atlantic Fellow for Social and Economic Equity. I work with DEJUSTICIA. We are in the middle of the first thematic convening that the Atlantic Institute is organizing on climate issues. It is a convening on planetary health and just transitions. This convening started back in 2023 when a group of fellows began a set of conversations trying to identify ways to collaborate more effectively for advancing climate action and exploring how the Atlantic Institute could support the work that fellows are doing, but connecting the dots between the work that people are doing in different contexts. I thought that Colombia was a very good place for having that conversation because DEJUSTICIA is working for advancing a climate agenda from the global south in close connection with grassroots communities in Colombia, but also in an international dialogue with other organizations that are part of the networks that we belong to. So I propose DEJUSTICIA as our potential host for the convening and Colombia as the country to start this reflection. Colombia is trying to transition from an economy that relies a lot on fossil fuels, including oil and coal, towards a climate resilient and low carbon economy. That's a huge challenge for the country. And the country has been praised in spaces such as climate COPs for the courage to advance a decarbonization agenda. But in order to be successful in that aim, Colombia needs to have support from the international community in correcting the failures of the international systems that create a lot of obstacles to moving away from fossil fuels. Colombia is rich in natural resources, including fossil fuels, and the main reserves of coal, for instance, are in the north of Colombia, in region of La Guajira, where many indigenous communities are located, and they have been inhabiting these places for centuries. These areas are also very important in terms of the potential for producing renewable energies. So the issue for areas like La Guajira is how they can reduce the dependence on coal to make the most of the potential they have for producing renewable energy. And then you have to negotiate with a lot of actors there, because on the one hand, you have, for instance, the workers of the coal company. On the other hand, you have indigenous communities that historically have seen that coal is not translating into benefits for them. But the real problem for Colombia is how to combat deforestation in the Amazon, because that's the main contribution that Colombia can do in terms of combating climate change by capturing carbon. Colombia has huge challenges being able to design policies that increase the trust that communities have on institutional authorities to be able to implement strong adaptation policies and to protect the Amazon.
Hello, my name is Lisa McMurray. I'm from the Atlantic Fellows for Social Equity. I live on Gadigal country, otherwise known as Sydney, Australia.
Hello, I'm Renard Siu. I'm part of the Atlantic Institute Health Equity in Southeast Asia program. I'm from Malaysia, and it's such a great pleasure to be here at our first climate convening.
My work in Australia is with a small not-for-profit, an Indigenous-run not-for-profit, and we work with traditional owners in remote areas and help them to tap into the carbon and the emerging biodiversity markets. We use one particular methodology called Savannah Fire, which utilises traditional fire practice to mitigate large-scale wildfires and reduce carbon emissions. And it's been really interesting, hasn't it, Renard? Because carbon and carbon credits particularly have been a big focus of our conversation this week.
Absolutely, Lisa. We all know that carbon markets, carbon credits has obviously been part of the bigger conversation around the achievement of net zero and just transition, but it's obviously fraught with a lot of challenges as well. I guess leading up to COP29 Baku, Azerbaijan, one of the things that we are trying to work on as part of the Malaysian Carbon Market Association is really to drive an ASEAN common carbon framework to really look at the methodologies that are out there and how we can promote high integrity, high quality carbon credits, quite similarly to the work that you are currently doing in Australia.
Funny that you use the term high integrity, because we haven't talked about high integrity a lot this week. But in the Australian context, we've been really lucky because we have our own regulated industry, which means that Indigenous people can tap into that and they own their carbon rights. They're registered in their names. They receive enormous untied income annually. But that's not the reason why Indigenous people in Australia are involved in the carbon program. They're actually getting back on country. They're returning country to health. They're able to employ young people as rangers. They're able to bring their old people back on country.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge is trying to align different stakeholders onto the sort of values and systems that we're trying to promote. And I'm glad that we're starting this conversation at our very first climate convening.
And rightfully so, because the voluntary carbon schemes, which exist in countries that don't have their own carbon industry, have really been exploited. And the income of carbon credits, when these schemes have been used badly, don't go to people on the ground. They don't go to communities. The carbon rights are taken somewhere else, and it becomes another extractive industry, just like mining, just like fishing, just like logging. And we even call this eco-colonialism. Mm-hmm. And I think the Australian example is a really good showcase to demonstrate that high integrity carbon credits that really benefit community aspirations is at the forefront of these initiatives. And that's why I'm going to COP16, which is the biodiversity COP, to really share what we're doing in Australia with our consortium of Indigenous-led agencies, to put what does biodiversity look like from an Indigenous lens, how would that be governed from Indigenous frameworks. So it's very exciting because I know that we are really at the forefront of packaging up Indigenous knowledges in a scheme such as the nature repair market or the biodiversity market, but a scheme that benefits traditional owners first and foremost.
So I really look forward, Lisa, to some of the work and conversations that you'll be having in Cali, especially around Indigenous-led community projects as such, trying to see if there's an opportunity for us to tap perhaps on some of that knowledge base that you have and see if we can actually replicate some of that in Malaysia and across ASEAN.
Okay, any group that wants to kick us off? Is that an offer to start? Great.
Coming to these spaces, we talk about the global north, global south, and I always leave with this question of what do we mean by it? and try not to leave with this guilt because I come from the U.S. and it's the evil empire. But at the same time, I'm in the U.S. trying to fight injustices that exist within the U.S. So we're talking about this global north, global south, but within the global north, I'm looking at water issues now. We have places where you could literally die if you drink water. You get higher rates of cancer. So you have these environmental injustices that are at par with anywhere else in the world. You have these huge inequities. So I'm Gil. I'm part of the Atlantic Fellows for Health Equity based in Washington University in D.C. My work looks at migration and health. Currently, I'm doing some projects on water in the desert in the West. What is the relationship between water and the immigrant community from Latin America in the Arizona desert? In the global north, we sometimes believe that we're the most prosperous and well off, but there's these huge inequities, and water is one of them, like how it affects certain populations, unequally affecting different groups.
Hello, my name is Phạm Thị Ngọc Bích, Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity in Southeast Asia. I come from Hanoi, Vietnam. I'm founder of a Slow Food community in Hanoi. And before I worked for United Nations Human Settlements Program, water is one of the issues that UN has to be focused on. At this moment, I'm support for the government of Vietnam for the sustainable transformation of food system through the healthy diets for all. I think water is the food, the potential food, even in the river, in the lake, in the ocean. Every year, I know that UN agencies, especially FAO, they also have the campaigns for the water. In Vietnam, we also implementing some kind of campaign to celebrate the day that the water is food.
That's great. It makes me think of the project that we're doing. You know, water is life, and that's actually the name of our project. Agua es vida. In Spanish, water is life. The importance of having clean water coming into farming, but also to be conscious of the water that comes out of farming. I'm thinking the pesticides used in the United States, which is corporate industrial agriculture, and the runoff that comes from the water you use for farming, the water we use for beef, how much water we waste just to have hamburger meat. Clean water and accessible water for everybody is important.
It sounds interesting because in Vietnam, we also raise the issue of the vanishing food waste in order to see how the food is come from and how the water is come from. Because you know, Vietnam is one of the most 5 countries to be affected by the climate change. And then I think that we can share experiences, lessons learned with you in Arizona and have some kind of collaboration.
Yeah, that's one thing I really appreciate about being here with you and other fellows here in Bogotá on this convening. It's these ideas that we're throwing around. But that's one thing I really appreciate about this fellowship. It brings people together. We might be working in different spaces, but they're all connected. You know, water, food, you can't have food without water. Water, you know, say it's life.
Hello. Okay, so it's so beautiful when a conversation keeps linking to each other. Gilberto started us off with this conversation around the global north and global south and what do we mean by that, and whether or not we are recognizing the nuances even within that framework that we use so frequently and so commonly, and think the whole room fully understands what the implications of it are. So one of the things we wanted to do after we move from unpacking the different words and jargon, was to really take stock of where the world is right now, looking at power positionality, the kind of global debates we're seeing. This panel is really about a provocation.
My name is Tisa Rodriguez. I have made my home in Riverside County, California. It's in the Inland Empire. It's a great place. And I'm from another great place, Imperial County, California, where there are a lot of people with a lot of needs. It kind of informs my whole way of life, my activism. I work as a library supervisor. I had a career in environmental planning, but I really wanted to be able to have a point of view. When you work for government or you work for a company, their point of view is your point of view. Now, if you are just an activist talking to a group of activists, no problem. So intentionally, I moved out of that space so that I could give that knowledge away. Yeah, I know how much you can get paid for it, but I feel so much richer helping people do the right thing. I do a transportation infrastructure. Who puts the bus station near your house? Who puts a road through your community? Who puts a traffic sign or a stoplight near your kid's school? Really important things, but a lot of things that people don't understand what goes into them. And I like being able to just say, this is what goes into them. Well, it's all about trying to achieve equity in access. I was also appointed by my congressman to be the chair of an advisory committee in our area for the major air base there that employs a lot of people. And in that capacity, I am able to work with city managers, with county representatives, all from my region of Riverside County, and to study projects, to ask the right questions. We have people who come and they want to speak. We're able to empower them and get their information, put it together, and then it goes to the larger board and they're able to make solid decisions based on that. But more than that, because I'm in there with the city managers and county representatives, I have been able to put more of a human element on some of these scientific terms. Air quality patterns is about people and their ability to breathe, not some nebulous thing. Traffic patterns, that's people in cars, not some nebulous thing. Water quality, people have to drink water. So we're going to consider it a little bit more. And if people want to speak passionately about it, yes, please do. We don't even have to agree. They have a legal right to speak to it, and I'm going to let them speak.
So day 2 was focused on finding common ground. We spent some time getting to know the people in the room. We also importantly spent some time understanding the context and jargon. Climate conversations can be difficult. People have different interpretations of what things mean. Terms like global north and global south can be problematic. For example, one of our fellows raised that whilst he's from the United States and a superpower, for most of the communities that he works with, they don't have access to safe water. Carbon credits, carbon markets, those are complicated for the majority of people, even those within the climate movement. We also started looking at things like positionality and power. Where we started off was actually human stories. So people locating themselves. Where do they have privilege? How do people see them? And what does it mean? We touched on factors like race, age, gender. What was really interesting in that discussion is we saw how many people had moved across sectors. So activists moving into government and then realizing how important government is and how undercapacitated government can be and how difficult the work can be. It was good to have a sense of how people changed their views and saw things in a different light. And then lastly, we closed up with understanding how people approach change. So activists, grassroots organizers, litigation, science and research, the carbon markets. Those were all approaches that our fellows have used to reduce the impact of climate on their communities.
That brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you for listening. Next time, we join Atlantic Fellows on the third day of the convening, which includes sessions on learning from the leadership shown by Colombia in the action against climate change. I'm Fionnuala Sweeney, and you've been listening to Atlantic Fellows Conversations from the Climate Action Convening in Colombia. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it on and subscribe to the series wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Atlantic Fellows and their work for equity, please go to our website at www.atlanticfellows.org.